The strait is closed again. I'm your host, not Bill Murray, but Sal Mercogliano. And yes, this is not February 2nd. It's actually May 3rd. It's week 9 of the conflict between Israel, the United States, and Iran. And more importantly, the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. blockade of Iran, and to throw some more into the mix here, piracy off the coast of Somalia, and another blockade that's been enforced for a very long time, and this one up in the eastern Mediterranean at Gaza. We've got all of that for you. We're going to recap what's happening right now. We're going to go over the past week and try to figure what the blockade is going on here. Because I follow this religiously, and I got to tell you, it's confusing as crap. And I'm not surprised if you are confused about it. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, so here is what we're looking at right now. This is a map out of Bloomberg showing you two things. Number one, Iranian territorial waters along the Persian Gulf, but more importantly, the areas they're claiming in the Strait of Hormuz. We have two competing blockades here. We have the Iranians who are enforcing a blockade through the Strait of Hormuz, trying to regulate the flow of traffic in and out, including the use of a toll. At the same time, the U.S. has established a blockade line where they are either turning back ships coming out of Iranian ports or preventing ships from going into Iranian ports unless they meet certain criteria for the delivery of humanitarian food and supplies. So this has been going on now for weeks, and what we've seen here is kind of a back and forth on it. All right, let's talk about the impact that we're seeing right now from the blockade. So one of the most important has to do with the price of oil. This is Brent crude over the past few years. You can see that spike here on the right side where Brent crude just went through the roof. Now, it's not the highest it's been in the past few years. You got to go back to 2022 where we saw really high oil prices. But to note there, the thing that's different between 2026 and 2022, number one, is oil prices were already exceptionally high when they spiked in 2022. This is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What's different in 2026 is how fast they spiked and the fact that they're remaining high and will continue to remain high. The other issue here is the availability of oil and resources coming out of the Persian Gulf. This is the 14 April report from the IEA, not the EIA. So EIA is the Energy Information Agency under the U.S. Department of Energy. This is the International Energy Agency, and they publish this report monthly. So this is their global overview. And again, this is from mid-April, so the data here is just a few weeks old. But global oil supply plummeted by 10.1 million barrels per day down to 97 million barrels per day in March with continued attacks on energy infrastructure in the Middle East. Now, they were expecting this to kick back up. You'll see here in the chart, come around July, they expect everything to be back toward normal and a restoration of oil that was lost. However, what we're not exactly clear is if this happens or not. This chart shows you oil on hand, particularly global observed oil inventories fell by 85 million barrels in March, with stocks outside of the Middle East Gulf drawn down by significant 205 million barrels. Oil on water plunged by 107 million barrels as the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz reduced oil in transit by 181 million barrels, while floating storage of crude and oil products in the Middle East rose by 100 million and onshore crude stocks in the region were up by 20 million. So basically, you have oil stuck in the Middle East, not able to get out. That's kind of offsetting some of the issues here with the decline. The key thing to note here is this 2026 number is very high. It's over basically every other year that you see here but 2021. Remember, 2021 we had massive amounts of stock left over because nobody was driving because of COVID. The problem is going to be how steep this graph drops, and when it drops below the last 5 years, that's going to be a cause of concern. You can see the oil on land that spiked back in 2020 went down, and now it's starting to come back up as oil is not able to move. But this drop of oil on water is of note. This is the real big problem that we're seeing right now, is the reduction in oil on water. and that is the graph here on the right side, that margin right there. So we're just over probably about 1.9 million barrels afloat. So oil is dropping, obviously, the production level. Now, again, we tend to focus a lot on oil, but this is going across the boards for liquefied natural gas, liquefied petroleum gas, for fertilizer, urea, MAPDAP, helium, sulfur, you name it. All the commodities that come out of the Middle East are jammed up in there. We can get oil out through some of the pipelines. We're getting 4.5 million barrels per day out of Yanbu into the Red Sea. We're getting about 1 million across the UAE pipeline to Fujairah, but the rest is bottled up in there. And there's some key points here to be made. We tend to focus a lot on the fact that the Iranians are not able to get oil out because of the blockade. Our buddies at Tanker Trackers had an interesting statistic the other day. In the month of April, Kuwait has exported a zero amount of barrels of oil. Zero. They haven't done that since August of 1990 when they got invaded by Iraq. This is significant. We keep talking about the impact of well closures in Iran, but what happens when Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, southern Iraq, maybe even Saudi Arabia and the UAE have to start shutting down some of their oil wells? So we got this update from Central Command, not a full update, but this was a post. Admiral Brad Cooper is out in the Central Command area. He is out doing ship visits. He was on the Tripoli. Now this is him on the Milius. But I wanted to note here is as of today, 49 commercial vessels have been redirected to comply with the blockade. U.S. forces remain fully committed to total enforcement. Talked about our buddies over at Tanker Trackers. This was an interesting note they just had over on X. There were 25 tankers that departed Iran with crude oil during April 2026. Of that lot, 7 were quickly redirected to Iran by the United States in the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean. 2 were seized by the U.S. in the Indian Ocean. This is the Majestic X and the Tiffany. And 1 reached the Far East. The other 15, most of those had reached their intended destinations or rendezvous points because they departed in the first half of April before the blockade went into effect. All right, we're going to do what we always do in these weekly reports. We're going to go take a look at the Joint Maritime Information Center's report. They've just issued this for 3 May. So here's the report for 3 May. Both the Arabian Sea, Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea, remain at critical levels. The Somali coast and the Somali basin was raised up to severe. Last week, it still remains at severe. 2 vessels are being held by Somali pirates. A 3rd vessel is likely en route to Somalia after being boarded. And a pirate action group. Yes, our favorite thing in the world, the pirate action group. Activity is assessed as highly likely across the Somali coast and Somali basin. PAG activity, again, how is this not the Pirate Expeditionary Group? Somebody came up with that acronym. I love that acronym a lot. Activity was reported 500 nautical miles east of Somalia. Coastal and offshore weather conditions remain conducive to small boat operations. Now, they note here in the report over the past 72 hours, several changes here. In the Arabian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz, the UK MTO received a report of an incident 11 nautical miles west of Sirak, Iran, in which the master of a northbound bulk carrier reported being attacked by multiple small craft. The vessel departed the area and all crew are reported safe. It goes on to say reports of mines in and near the traffic separation scheme persist, and global navigation systems interference remains sporadic but reduced from the level of activity recorded in March. The piracy threat in the Somali coast, Somali basin is severe. An oil products tanker continues to be held by the pirates on the northeastern Somali coast, and a general cargo ship remains held south of Eel. No injuries have been reported in either case. In the last 72 hours, a tanker reported an approach by a suspected pirate action group 500 nautical miles east of Somalia. The skiff closed to within 400 meters before disengaging. No injuries or damage were reported. 3 additional reports were issued regarding activity in the Gulf of Aden. 1 May, a bulk carrier reported a black-hulled skiff with 7 armed persons approaching. 2 May, a bulk carrier reported a green-hulled skiff accompanied by a white fishing vessel. And 2 May, a tanker was boarded and armed personnel 10 nautical miles off the coast of Yemen. The crew is detained by the attackers and is currently underway toward Somalia. So the peak of Somali pirate activity was from 2005 to 2012. That level of piracy was aimed at seizing ships, holding them hostage, and extracting money from them. That was the goal of that piracy. That piracy was being driven by many factors, not the least of which was the area off Somalia was overfished and polluted because there was no oversight of those waters. The Somali government had collapsed, and so ships coming down from the Red Sea out of the Suez were dumping crap and everything in the ocean there. Their waters were being overfished by areas, so fishermen, people who were working in and around the sea, took to piracy. They started grabbing ships. Most ships were held for long periods of time until their owners dropped bags of money from the sky to let them go, unless you happen to be Tom Hanks, an American, in which case you get half the U.S. Navy coming to save you, because Tom Hanks is a treasure and we have to save Tom Hanks. But for most everybody else, they got to be held out there. This escalation right now off the coast of Somalia, I think, is very interesting because the ships being targeted are very small. We're talking about 3,000 to 5,000 ton ships. I think, and particularly the tankers being grabbed are being done to bring fuel into Somalia, because Somalia is one of these places that's not on the tail end of the supply chain, and they are getting disrupted because of what is happening up in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. If we look at the traffic trends, again, 138 vessels per day. On 30 April, we had 10 transits. On 1 May, 15 transits. And on 2 May, 9 transits. I can't help but note that Jitmic removed the dates from the top of the title of this chart. For obvious reasons, they kept missing it. So here's our transits from 26 April through 2 May. Again, we're looking at Strait of Hormuz, SOH. Bam, that is the Bab el Mandeb. Cheers. But we're looking at Strait of Hormuz. So 26 April, we had 3 transits. 27 April, we had 3 transits. 28 April, we had 11 transits. 26 April, we had 16 transits. 30 April, we had 10 transits, about evenly divided, 6 heading westward, 4 heading eastward. On 1 May, we had 15 transits in, 8 heading westward, 7 heading eastward, and then a total of 9 transits, with 3 heading westward and 6 heading eastward. And you can see the graph down there at the bottom. While we're seeing a bit of an uptick in the number of ships coming through the Strait of Hormuz, nowhere near the levels previously. So this is Windward AI's dashboard as of May 3rd, showing you their data. 904 vessels in the Gulf, 5 inbound passages, 4 on AIS, one of them was dark. 7 outbound passages, all on AIS. Dark activity events, about 176, and a grand total of 34 vessels attacked since the beginning of the period. So on May 2nd, 2026, the transit volume through the Strait of Hormuz was totaling 12 crossings, 5 inbound, 7 outbound. They have a dark inbound there, but it's a very small vessel. When they say MSV, MSVs are very small kind of cargo vessels. If we look at the fleet composition of the 904 ships, 136 are bulk carriers, 88 are product tankers, 33 are chemical tankers, 74 are crude tankers, 64 container ships, 43 LNG and LPG, and 466 others. The leading registries in the area are Panama, followed by Iran, Comoros, UAE, and the Marshall Islands in Liberia. Here's their chart for the Hormuz crossings. The key thing here I note is their destinations. 65 of all ships are heading for China, 10% are Russian-linked, 8% are Iran-linked, 5% to Singapore, 4% to South Korea, with 8% going others. And then they do an analysis of Karg Island over the past 4 days. So on 30 April, 5 dark vessels were detected on and immediately around Karg Island, including a VLCC detected to the east side. On 2 May, 6 dark vessels converging back on Karg Island. On 1 May, 23 dark vessels detected, but the jump from 5 to 23 reflected expanded coverage, not an overnight surge. Finally, they have a breakdown here on vessels under attack, and you can get on their newsletter and information down below. I'll, of course, have the link in the show notes to get over to the Windward dashboard. So the UK MTO has received a report from several shipmasters in the vicinity of Ras Al Khaimah, UAE, that they've been directed via VHF broadcast to move from their anchorages. Authorities continue to investigate, and vessels are requested to continue to report any further suspicious activity. So here's marine traffic at about 0900 on 3 May. That anchorage they were talking about is right here. and not seeing any large movements of ships too much. Some ships are beginning to move. You can see some of them beginning to move out here. Some of the green ones. Green are container ships. Red are tankers. So you do see some movement here out of the anchorage in this area. Not exactly sure why that is happening or who made this warning, but it's of particular note that there are obviously concerns. These are the ships kind of waiting here for the moment to be able to jump into the Strait of Hormuz and try to get out. And then the last date we got from the JITMIC was this one here. This is their advisory note 003-26. This one in particular is doing a blockade update with how ships carrying humanitarian aid should be vetted so that they can get into Iran. There was a boarding this past week we'll talk about by the United States on a ship that was supposedly heading into Iran. And so the question has come up about how do you properly get vessels into Iran to deliver humanitarian aid, particularly food. All right, that gets you caught up on all the news going on right now as of May 3rd. Let's recap the past week's major stories. Again, we go to G Captain for that. We look through the past week. I pull what I think is the most relevant stories out there, and I'll have the link over the G Captain, so if you want to pull up those stories. So April 26th, Trump's Hormuz blockade has deepened a historic shipping crisis. So this Bloomberg story really goes in to some great detail. This was right at the beginning of week 9 here and recaptures that chart I used at the very beginning from Bloomberg. That's where it comes from. They have a good little analysis here on how this is a historic shipping crisis. This is the most significant one we've seen in recent years. I think you literally have to go back to 1968 and the Six-Day War shutting the Suez down to have something akin to this. But the volume of traffic today is magnitudes bigger than it was back in 1968. April 27th, Iran-linked oil tankers sail west after boarding by the United States. So we had talked about the seizure of two tankers, the Majestic X and the Tiffany. This is them here on marine traffic. Now, those ships were seized in this region between Sri Lanka and Indonesia. This is the northern tip of Sumatra right here. Those ships were seized, and the ships began to sail southwest. I thought they were heading here to Diego Garcia, but the ships have since turned around and are now sitting here somewhere in the region where they were almost captured at. Not exactly sure where they're going or what is happening with them. They may be heading through the Malacca Straits, through Singapore, and potentially heading to a U.S. port. The closest one, I think, would be Guam that they're heading to, but it's just not clear what is happening with them. But those two ships were seized. And remember, the seizure of those two ships happened under UNCLOS, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. Article 110, Section 1D says if you're a stateless vessel, and these two ships were stateless vessels, they were flying false flags, they can be boarded and captured, and that's exactly what has happened here. April 27th, twin hijackings off Somalia signal dangerous escalation in pilot resurgence. So we talked about those seizures off the coast of Somalia. Again, we're seeing that resurge. The last time we saw Somali pirates resurge was during the Houthi attacks on shipping in 2024 and 2025. That was the last time we saw that. I don't think this is in conjunction with Iran. We don't think it was in conjunction with Iran last time. This is an issue internal in Somalia. There's a lot going on. There's a civil war in Somalia between Somaliland. There's issues over control, and plus shortages are starting to hit countries around the world because of the disruption coming out of Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The IMO chief warns no safe transit in Hormuz, rejects tolls at UN Security Council. So this is a good piece of information from the IMO. I don't usually say good things about the IMO, but I will this time. Arsenio Dominguez at the UN talked about this and says, listen, we are not going to allow Iran to issue tolls. There was a story going out from an official in Indonesia that Indonesia was thinking about this. Indonesia said they're not going to put tolls in the Malacca, Sunda, Lombok Strait. That's not what they're going to do. And the precedent of Iran initiating tolls through the Strait of Hormuz, which is an open water passage under Article 37 of UNCLOS, is important. And yes, Iran has not ratified UNCLOS. The U.S. has not ratified UNCLOS. And let me be clear, Iran has not just ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 1982, they haven't ratified the Convention of 1958 either, which, in my opinion, then, puts you back to the period of time when territorial waters were 3 nautical miles, not 12 nautical miles, cannon shot distance. This story was under the radar, but really important. The Iran's guards seized wartime powers, blunting supreme leader's role. One of the things the United States and Israel has done is decapitated the Iranian government. The problem with decapitation strikes is you don't know who is in charge anymore. This is always the problem in revolutions and everything. You don't know what you're going to get. And now it appears that the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is exercising wartime powers on their own, which makes it very difficult to negotiate and makes it very difficult to know who's in charge and who's doing what regarding the Strait of Hormuz. Also on April 28th, the UAE quits OPEC, the oil-producing exporting countries, in a major blow to the global oil producers group. Now, UAE has been talking about this for a long time. If you follow oil, UAE has threatened this forever. They are doing this because they want to increase production, because they realize that there is a shortage, because OPEC nations can't fully export oil, in particularly Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq. They want to get their oil out on the market. And what we're seeing is OPEC is doing this too. OPEC just announced they're upping their production, but UAE took this as an opportunity and they bolted from OPEC. Security Council demands freedom of navigation in Hormuz as shipping risks mount. So this follows after the IMO talk at the UN Security Council. The UN now is demanding freedom of navigation in Hormuz. So we're starting to see the rest of the world realize that the Strait of Hormuz is really, really important. You've got to put aside your issues with President Trump in the United States. Got to get the strait open. Got to get flow of oil and all these other commodities back going again. April 28th, U.S. forces search and release container ships suspected of violating blockade on Iran. So this is the Blue Star 3. That's the ship right there being boarded by Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. Now, this ship was searched, but it was determined that the ship was not heading into Iran, and so therefore the ship was released. But this is why the Joint Maritime Information Center released the new advisory about how to bring ships into Iran through the blockade, what they need to do if they want to make passage through. April 29th, aged oil tanker suggests Iran is bringing back retired ships. So I said in a video at one point, and I can't remember, I was asked how many days does Iran have till they run out of storage space? I don't know. I just really don't know. And the problem here is, what is storage space? They are starting to use older tankers for storage space. They have tanks ashore. There is a variety of things they can do to make up storage space. I don't know. I think Kuwait's got the same problem too, and Kuwait has a lot less room to deal with this than Iran does. So the fact that they're moving old derelict tankers up to Kharg Island is significant. However, I would not mark that as Iran is critical here. We had that statement from the President of the United States talking about the idea that they were a couple of days away. I don't think they're anywhere near a couple of days away. I mean, this is weeks, probably out at best. Trump discusses sustaining the Iran blockade for months as oil prices surge. So President Trump has given a lot of talks here recently. And I got to say, one I had a problem with, in which he joked, and I get President Trump likes to joke. I got it. I love the joke. I am not president of the United States, and I am not in a state of war right now with Iran. So, my humor is not as important as the president of the United States. But he kind of compared ourselves to pirates. And I have repeatedly said over and over again that the United States is not pirates. Pirates are stateless, lawless criminals on the high seas. The United States is not pirates because we're a state. And by definition, you can't be a pirate if you're a state. You just can't. Now, you can do piratical activity. That's right, piratical is a word. You can do piratical activity, but you're not a pirate. And the other thing is, I don't think, while some in the Navy may enjoy being called pirates, you really want to call your Navy a batch of pirates, especially in the U.S. Navy that was literally founded in fighting pirates. I mean, literally the 1794 Naval Act that created the first 6 ships in the modern U.S. Navy, one of which, still in commission today, USS Constitution, were used to fight pirates. Well, not really pirates, Barbary pirates. They weren't pirates, they were state-sponsored terrorists, but they were pirates as we call them. So I don't think that's a really good issue here. But Trump discussing sustaining this blockade for months is a problem. And we're going to come back to the other issue this associates, which is a war powers issue. U.S. pushes international maritime freedom construct as Strait of Hormuz remains shut. So the U.S. is trying to get international nations involved in restoring the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. I gotta say, that didn't really work very well in the Red Sea and the Bab el Mandeb. Cheers. We tried that with Operation Speeds under the European Union. They committed anywhere from 2 to 6 ships at different times. They were able to escort a handful of ships, a day through there, but nowhere near the levels they would have to do for the Strait of Hormuz. This is a chart that was posted over on X. Was drawn by David Peterson, who was on USS Marvin Shields, which was a frigate in 1991, deployed to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. It gives you an idea of the naval footprint that was in the Persian Gulf during the first Persian Gulf War. Some people are calling this Persian Gulf War 3. I do think it's Persian Gulf War 3, but I don't agree with their numbering. I think the first Persian Gulf War was the tanker war. The second one was the war to liberate Kuwait. And then the third one is what we're in now. I think the Iraq War wasn't a Persian Gulf War, it was an Iraq War. Anyway, small numbers, small difference there. But you can see the scope and scale of ships there. That doesn't even include all the ships there, because my ship is not on there. The USNS Comfort, the hospital ship, along with Mercy, is not shown on there. But it gives you an idea of the scope and scale you would need for this maritime freedom construct that President Trump is talking about here. All right. Israel intercepts Gaza aid ships in international waters. Organizers decry move. So for the third time now this has happened, the Israelis have boarded a fleet of vessels out in the Mediterranean that's heading toward Gaza. Now, Israel has declared Gaza to be under blockade since 2003, I believe it is. And last year, there was a fleet that was sent out to do it. It was intercepted by the Israelis. They actually came under drone attack on the way. Not sure who did it and what happened. I have been critical about this the entire time. Number one, I think boarding sailboats, this group wants a reaction. They want the Israelis to board them. They're not delivering aid in any measurable amount to Gaza. Let's be clear. They want to provoke the action, and they get it from the Israelis because the Israelis boarded them in the waters just south of Greece. If you are going to board these vessels, you should wait until you come within the blockade area. And to be a blockade, and one of the things that the U.S. has done is follow the Newport Manual for blockade, or the San Remo Manual, whatever one you want to talk about here. You've got to set boundaries. You've got to enforce it. It's got to be rigidly enforced. But more importantly, you've got to be able to allow humanitarian aid to go through. And again, if these ships are delivering humanitarian aid, then that raises the concern right there. Do you have a right to inspect them? Yes, as they get closer in, not south of Greece. This is my problem with this. Freedom of navigation is coming under attack in large numbers here, and it's being perpetrated by everyone, not just one side or the other. It's the U.S., it's Iran, it's Israel, it's Russia, it's the EU. I mean, everybody's doing this. Everybody likes playing loose with the laws out in the middle of the high sea, and we really have got to get better at this, because what we're doing is breaking down the international rules-based order at sea. I know some people hate that phrase. I got that. I understand some of you right now have got steam shooting out of your ears. I got it. But you really do need rules at sea, because this is international waters. And when you start executing these type of boardings and operations, again, raises lots of issue. I am not being hypocritical here. I am critical of U.S. operations in the Caribbean, where they're shooting and blowing up boats without inspecting them. I've come out against that all the time. There's no reason those boats can't be stopped, searched. The Coast Guard does it. They've been doing it for years. You can do it. They need more resources, more assets to do it. Coast Guard snipers in the back of helicopters can shoot out motors from a pretty good distance and stop almost any boat. You don't need to use drones and Hellfire missiles to blow every boat up. I got it. If you want to make a point, congratulations, you've made your point. But you can stop doing that. Same thing with the boardings in the Mediterranean by Israel. I don't agree, disagree. I am not giving you my view on Gaza and Israel at all. I am coming at this from the perspective on how you handle issues like blockades. You've got to have a clear, defined area in which that blockade is going to be enforced. Yes, these ships said that they were going to break the blockade. It doesn't mean you can board them coming out of Italian waters. You've got to set up your blockade because what they're trying to do is trigger a reaction, and they triggered one. Next story, May 1st, U.S. Treasury expands Hormuz toll warning, puts maritime industry on notice. So the U.S. Treasury is warning companies that if you pay tolls to the Iranians, you will be sanctioned. They're basically saying that if you touch that, if you touch Iranian tolls, you're going to have a sanction stick with you. And what they're trying to do is deter people from doing that. Venezuela oil exports hit 7-year high as U.S., India, and Europe ramp up buying. India, in particular, is buying huge amounts of Venezuelan oil right now. So U.S. had that operation against Venezuela earlier this year, and now what we see is Venezuela's oil exports are up. 7-year high, nowhere near what they were anywhere close to in the past. But they are starting to ramp up about 1.23 million barrels per day. They were up over 3 million barrels per day years ago. So obviously Venezuela's got a lot to do, but this is going to start influxing money into Venezuela. The problem is India was getting a lot of its oil from the Persian Gulf. Venezuela is a good distance away. And so even though they're going to be getting more oil from Venezuela, that ton-mile distance is so much further, it creates problems. Exxon, Chevron beat profit estimates on war-driven oil rally. Well, who could have guessed that? I mean, who would have guessed that oil companies are going to be making a literally boatload of money over this issue? I mean, when you see oil prices spike, when you're seeing gas prices now over $4 a gallon for gasoline, $6 a gallon for diesel, I mean, what do you expect right now? And again, we are just beginning to feel the shock. A lot of people asking questions, why are we feeling this in the United States? That's because U.S. oil and U.S. gas and U.S. diesel and U.S. aviation fuel is being exported at record number. And that means your gas, your diesel, whatever you're using, is being competed for on an international market. And shutting off exports does not fix that. Instead, what you'll do is crash the industry. So you can't do it by just shutting everything down and nationalizing it, which some people have said. We have this story. White House says Iran hostilities terminated as war power deadline arrives. Peace in our time. That's right. We're at peace. Congratulations. This is what peace feels like. It's not peace. First off, I have a problem with war powers issues to begin with. The U.S. in its entire history has only declared war 11 times. I teach a course in military history, so I love talking about this topic. First time we did it was against the British in 1812. The most recent time we've done it is in 1942 against Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary, the Axis powers. We have not declared war since 1942. We've been to war a bunch of times. We just don't declare war. Instead, what we tend to use are authorization of the use of military force or some sort of resolution that comes out of Congress. So, for example, in September of 2001, Congress passed this. This is the authorization for the use of military force in 2001. The heart of this document is one single paragraph that gives the president authorization to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determined planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001. My iTunes agreement is more comprehensive than that thing, and that gives the President of the United States authority to wage war across the planet because of September 11th, 2001. I think we should declare war more often. Not that I'm a warmonger, it's just this reason. When you declare war, while we have declared war 11 times, we've also declared peace 11 times. When you declare war, there's a peace settlement you have to turn it off. The hardest thing to do is turn off a conflict. And the problem with use of authorization of military forces, whether it's the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, whether it's the 2001 AUMF, whether it's the authorization to go into Korea, you name it, all of these have a problem in that they have no end date on them. There's no expiration date on them. War declarations don't have an expiration on them, but you are in a state of war, and no nation wants to remain in a state of war, so you have peace treaties that come out of them. I don't buy the idea that because we're in a ceasefire with Iran, the war powers clock resets. I don't. I'm sorry. On April 19th, I covered it on this channel. The USS Spruance shot the motor vessel Tuska, a Iranian container ship with 5-inch shells. Yeah, they were inert, but they still shot them. and put holes in the side of the vessel. So, I mean, there is no ceasefire. There's a ceasefire between the U.S. bombing Iran, but the ceasefire is not existing on the blockade line. We're seeing that. We're boarding ships. We're seizing ships. We're diverting ships. Blockade is an act of war. It's literally in the Newport Manual on Naval Warfare. I mean, it's literally in the title. So the idea that we're not still on this is a big problem. But again, this is Congress having to grow a set and actually force the president to acknowledge that a war powers issue exists. But many Congresses don't. And I don't care what political party you are. Congress has been deferring to the chief executive for a long time. It's not new. It's not this president. It's a whole batch of presidents going back a long time. May 1st, U.S. targets Iran-China oil pipeline in dual sanctions move on shipping and finance. So the U.S. is trying to do a couple of things here because one of the things we're seeing is some Iranian ships have gotten through the blockade. There were 3 Iranian ships in particularly that kind of dinged up on AIS out in Southeast Asia. Now, the reason they can get out is a lot of these ships are starting to skirt through territorial waters of Pakistan, Iran, India, you name it. So the U.S. may know those ships are out there, but they are out there. So for example, here is the Iranian tanker Huge heading through the Lombok Strait. She popped up on AIS 20 hours ago, and she is heading inbound. She is showing in a laden condition. Can I also say something too? Who chooses the names for Iranian tankers? I mean, they are the weirdest group of names. The Huge? I mean, seriously, I think someone over at NITC is just mocking everyone with the names they come up with their tankers. But here's the Huge going in. Now, just because this ship is out doesn't mean it's gotten away from the United States. There still could be an opportunity for the ship to be seized. One of the things we've seen is how the U.S. is using naval forces in different regions to take down certain tankers. So we'll see what happens here with this vessel. And then finally, our last story, India-linked ship carrying cooking fuel manages Hormuz exit. So we've seen a couple of ships get out from the Persian Gulf. There was a Japanese VLCC tanker that came out, and now this one, an Indian-linked ship coming out of the area. So again, what we're seeing is some ships are able to make their transits out, meaning they're either paying the toll or being released by Iran. Remember, we've seen Iran say that they'll let some ships out. For example, they said they'll let Iraqi ships out, but we've seen Iraqi ships piled up in the Persian Gulf not coming out. So the situation in week 9 is no more clear than it was back on week 1, unfortunately. This situation seems to want to continue. The Trump administration and Iran has opportunities to come discuss. One of the things that Iran recently brokered was an idea to separate the nuclear discussion from reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. said no to that. So that kind of was the breakdown in the most recent negotiations. So right now it looks like a standoff here between the two sides. Iran and the United States will continue their competing blockades. We've got the Somalis with piracy going on, so we'll see. We'll probably get some sort of naval forces from nations around the world to go down there and do that, although the ships they're grabbing are Palau flagged, Comoros, Togo. These are not really big registries, so I'm not exactly sure even if we're going to get European Union and Asian countries down here to do anything. And then, of course, the situation in the Mediterranean, this goes back really to the root of some of the problems that we've been having, which is the Israeli Gaza fight that started back in October 7th of 2023 with the attack out of Gaza into Israel and then Israel's response. This is what led to the Houthis initiating their attacks. Oh, it is a lot, I know. I apologize. So I hope you got something out of today's video. Be sure to check out these videos for more information. Again, there are a lot of videos we've been posting. We just did one on the effectiveness of the U.S. blockade. Also did one on the logistical support for U.S. naval forces out off the blockade line. Both of those go in a little bit more detail than before. And again, we appreciate your support of the page. How do you support the page? Well, a couple of ways. You can give it a big thumbs up. You can share it across social media. You can subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. You can hit the super thanks down below and contribute directly to the page, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until the next episode, Sal, sign off.